If I look at family and I define that in every sense, wherever it is, we look back and we would say, who are people that no matter what stage of life I was in, what circumstances I'm going through, what comments I make, or what success or failure I'm having, they're still with me. And that to me is family.
Welcome back. We're glad you've returned for Season 1, Episode 2 of the ReedFlections podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm Art Calderon, your conversation facilitator. I'll be steering us through, making sure we hear all the stories Reed wants us to hear and perhaps a couple he does not. I'm here with my long-term friend, Reed Nyffeler, and we're glad you've joined us on the journey to live a life on purpose. Now, Reed, you're a husband, you're a dad, you're a CEO of a growing global company. And you share your time, your talent, and your treasure with people and organizations you care about in the community and around you. Your journey is filled with personal and professional experiences that you can share with others who are eager to live a life on purpose. Now, in our first conversation, we heard about your foundational priority for living a life on purpose, your unwavering faith in God. Today, you'll help us to continue thinking about other critical priority, which is living a life on purpose, the priority of focusing on your family. Tell us what you think it looks like to help the people that we love, our families, to live a life on purpose.
Yeah, first of all, I think family means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? Because,
Sure.
before when I was in my teens, my family was my immediate family, right? My parents and my siblings, and that's what family meant. And that term didn't change when I got married. And I know you're a grandparent, and so
Right.
your family includes a grandchild.
Yeah.
And so we use that term family universally, but at each stage of those examples of family, our intent and lives are different, but the priority is the same, family. And I think most people would say, wait a minute, this is my first priority. Reed, why? I don't believe in that faith. That shouldn't be my first priority. My first priority is always my family. And I think that's what people would say. And I would say this, if you have a foundation of faith, you would have a different outcome of your family. I can't choose my parents or my siblings. And so then, however, I can choose a spouse. Well, the spouse is going to be drawn to my priorities, right? If I didn't state them, they're going to see my priorities. My wife, Dana, would say, let me see how Reed lives his life and see if those priorities are evident.
And do you think she saw your faith in God as a priority?
Absolutely. But she also saw things that repelled her. But that's a whole nother story. I think the faith kept her around, maybe.
Yep. It was
Because
some
she
strong faith.
That's
man.
right. Overcame all my other obstacles I had overcome. Art, that's an early choice, life choice.
Good one.
Yeah. So because I think ultimately, if we were to say, and we're looking at a significant other, just as I was looking at her for her faith, I would say, hey, there's certain things that as individuals we're going to make a different choice in. And so if we're maybe unmarried, and if that's the stage we say our family, that's usually immediate family or people we'd call family. Maybe we're not in a traditional family where there's two married parents and children like I grew up in, and so we would call other individuals as family. Military people call each other family, and so when we talk about a family, that's a committed group of people that you would go beyond your daily habits to
Right.
provide for. And so that's what I mean by family, is people that are going to be lifelong relationships through thick or thin,
Mhm.
right? So regardless, if I look at family and I define that in every sense, whether we're talking about wherever it is, we look back and we would say, who are people that no matter what stage of life I was in, what circumstances I'm going through, what comments I make, or, what success or failure I'm having, they're still with me. And that to me is family. And for some people, that's people that others would consider friends that are there no matter what circumstance in life, and they'd call them family. And so that's that second priority, people that'll be with you no matter what stage in life you're in, no matter whether it's up, down, or any which sideways. But I go back to my first priority in that regard, because a family, as I defined, is through every circumstance. Yet a mother and a father give unconditional love to their children, right? At the moment they're born, right? You hold them for the first time. Your mother held you, and maybe it took two or three hands because you're a larger guy. Maybe the nurse had to help. But as your mother held you, she offered you unconditional love.
That's
Just as
right.
when you hold that grandchild, you offer unconditional love, right? And that's what a family then in a personified way can provide, that unconditional love. Or does it over time become conditional? And so that is what is demonstrated in our foundation of faith is unconditional love. God loves us regardless. Now, if you look at my calendar, my personal calendar, the first thing I put on there is my kids' schedule, because candidly, God's more accessible as my first priority than my kids. I mean, I'm just being honest.
You can talk to him anytime.
He's available no matter what. However, I mean, I call some of my kids, their voicemail is full, and they said, "Can I call you right back?" And they may not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I recognize God's available all the time. So I'm not giving him less time, but he's available when I need him. My kids, when they need me, I'm available,
Yeah.
but that may not reciprocate at this stage in life I'm in. Here's when the holidays are, right? Where
Yeah.
we're going to spend time together. And here's their circumstances. In fact, I even take it a step further. I remember when my child, my oldest, was 2 years old, and I was there coming home, and my wife needed some help, so I always allocate time. I call it 8 to 5 and 5 to 8. Even though I was starting this business and I was two, they were 2, 4, and 6. I would always say I work from 8 to 5, and then I go back to work from 5 to 8. And what I meant was I'm at the office from 8 to 5. And then at early stage of the business, sometimes we have to invest more time. And so from 5 p.m. till 8 p.m., I protected that with every ounce of my being, because that was the time our family was collectively together before bedtime, right? Because
You're having dinner, everybody's home, you can put them to bed, you get them ready for bed, talk about their day,
That's
all
right.
those things.
And it goes back to energy too, because if I'm exhausted from work, and this is why it's got to be a lived priority, not a stated priority. Some people have family as their stated priority, but they don't give any energy to their family. I would use my drive home, regardless of what was happening, as a way to just reset my emotional and mental and physical mentality the most I could. And that's where I'm managing my energy. Because we can be in a work environment or wherever we're at, and we can be super drained, and that's all they see. That's all the family gets is the second. In my case, work is third priority. They're the second priority. So my energy needs to be mapped accordingly.
Right.
So then from 5 to 8, and early in this business, we're a 24/7 business. So I'd go back to work at 8 p.m. because that's their bedtime, right? We put them down to bed, and then I'd go back to work. And I remember doing that at an early stage. But I wanted to prioritize the family around that. So one of the things I've learned as a principle of anything with regard to family, and I would even say management, is we manage in an environment. And as that environment, if they perform in that environment, it expands. And so as an infant, they're born and they're in a bassinet. And so as they begin to get in a cadence of sleeping, they can go to maybe a pack and play or a bed. And if they have guardrails on that bed, then we can see they can sleep in that environment. Then pretty soon we let them operate anywhere within that room. To me, that's a giving as a parent an ability to condition our children in this world, this broad world that's, you know, 30,000 miles around. So early on, I was highly intentional around that, right? As a priority, I managed my energy to say, hey, I'm not just here to invest in an employee at work and then they go on and go wherever they're at. These are the greatest investment I can make. The legacy will be established based upon my family, not the business, right? Even though I think more people be aware of the business, the generational legacy for each of
Right.
us is our family.
And you talked a little bit earlier on our last podcast about eternal things.
Yeah.
And the eternal thing is going to be, I think, more how you treated your family, how you raised them, rather than how successful you were at a
For sure.
business.
Yeah, again, at your funeral, to your point, nobody says, hey, I just got your most recent quarterly results. I thought I'd read that as the eulogy. But that's what we live to each
Right,
week,
right.
right? Is like, what is my most recent performance at work? What was the profit and loss statement or everything else? No, what are they reading? They're talking about your impact in your local family
Right.
and your family history, and then ultimately what the legacy would otherwise be
Yeah.
going forward.
I've always thought, you can tell a lot about a man by the way he interacts with his adult children.
Yeah.
And I think from what I've seen, you do that very well. And that didn't happen when they turned 18. That happened when they were 2 years old and 3 years old, and teaching them some of the things you talked about right now.
Yeah, and maybe we need to define adult children, because is that age or maturity or what? I mean, Art, I don't know. Maybe I act like a child as an adult anyways myself, but I agree with you completely. And I think part of that is, one, we try, I'm the same dad, but does each of my children need the same
Right.
response in those circumstances,
They're
right?
all different.
They're all different. And I think, as we look at that, I'm looking at to say, okay, we were all created for purpose, on purpose, for a purpose. And that includes these my children. And my wife and I have talked about this. We have 4 kids, and they have 4 distinct personalities, and they're raised in the same environment. And we tried to be as equal and fair as parents can be, at the same time as they developed in a different way. And so that is my role now, is to respond to that and say, okay, what is the appropriate thing to say here? I mean, I have one child that wants to learn by their mistakes. So I make sure I mistake them for other children. I don't know. But no, I think that's one way to learn. And so in that principle, what I've learned is to say, hey, immediately in that opportunity that they probably would have chose different, have a conversation.
Mm.
Because that's where the learning is now, okay, now I see the effects. And some children are more likely to say, hey, what's your advice here before I make the decision? And then I say, okay, I'm not going to make the decision for you. Back to that environment I was
Yes.
communicating, I'm say, hey, you're now in your room. You can govern wherever you
Yeah.
want. And your toys are in the corner. There's your bed. You can go to bed if you like to. And over there is a closet you can pinch your fingers in. So don't touch that. And if you see that they
Uh-huh.
can make that decision in that room, you see that they go to their toys.
Right.
And then they put them back in their basket. And then they go to bed on their own. You're like, perfect. I can expand the environment to the first floor of the house
Right.
and go beyond. And I think that's part of parenting, right? Is we see them have success in those environments. We see them make
And
progress.
isn't that so hard when they get to be adults and you have to let them make their choices? You told them, here are the parameters, here's some good ideas here, but ultimately you got to back off and you got to say, okay, they're no longer my needy child. They're a young adult now making decisions, and I have to allow them to do that. For me, that's the hardest part of having an adult child.
I completely agree. And I've learned that many times as parents, we're going to be inclined to give correction.
Hmm.
Don't do this.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't do that. However, when we do that, we avoid that. So if I say, don't go outside in the cold without your coat, like, okay, I won't. But what should I do? Right? What do I do? If I'm not doing that, what am I doing? And I think a principle that I learned, which is part of my foundation of faith, is give direction, correction, then direction.
Uh-huh.
Don't go outside without your coat. But if you're going outside, grab your coat, your hat, your gloves, and make sure you have your car keys. That's correction with direction.
Yeah.
And so, again, if we look at that, now we're teaching them how to make a decision. If I'm going to go outside, I said, what should I not do? Which is readily communicated by a parent and probably the easiest thing to say. But what should I do?
Right.
We're helping them in that
And,
environment.
or
to make that decision.
here's some choices, here's some consequences.
Right. And then I'm going to be there with correction and direction. And what you're doing is you're not making the decision for them.
Right.
You're giving them a choice because what you're teaching them is a framework to make a good choice.
Yeah.
So that when they go out into the world, they have a framework of good choice. And I think other things that I've learned, and probably one of the most unique and or successful things I've done as a parent, is I recognize at certain stages there's critical choices we're going to make that'll set up a framework going forward. And I have that as a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And so when my oldest was 8 years old, I recognized, you know what? I said to my wife, and she's not a planner, and I'm a planner. I said, when our kids are 12, and what I'm going to talk to them about, I'm going to let them pick the trip. And so I'll just, hey, where would you like to go? And we'll kind of work together because they're making choices on destinations, which we do everywhere in life. And I'm also going to have an intentional conversation around choices with them at that time. Because in junior high, 12 years old, we're going to make a decision that either one, our friends are going to ask us, peer pressure, to do something that might be different than our parents' long-term outcome are going to advise. And so I'm intentional about letting them choose where to go. And then in that moment there, I'm saying, hey, as you're entering junior high or in junior high, you're going to have friends that are going to suggest these types of things. I am always here for your long-term benefit. My decisions, if I say no to a event you want to participate in or a decision, that's because I'm looking at your long-term. I can tell you, I reflect back on my junior high days. I can't say that I communicate with one single person that I was around at junior high that was influencing my decisions, but I do talk to my parents. And so I'm here, your mother and I are here to help you make decisions long-term. So that's my 12-year conversation. Then at 15, I recognize as they're getting to the point of driving and other things, that's where I see entitlement set in, right? And so I take them on a mission trip. And that mission trip is to say, hey, how we live is not how the world lives. And we were created for purpose and on purpose, but that purpose is not us. I was put in this place and time. And I think that comes with a sense of responsibility. And so we're put in this place and time, and I'm showing, hey, you could be put in any of these environments that we're serving in. That literally nothing is different, even by age and even gender, other than proximity. And so that's at 15. Then at 18, going into that world, it's a world of opportunity. I let them pick anywhere in the world they want to go. And it's just me and them. And then at time I said, hey, your worldview is based upon your experiences at this point. And largely in our case, it's in the Midwest. And so if we base all our decisions on our exclusive universal worldview to this point, we're going to make mistakes, right? Because the beauty of the world is the multicultural, multi-dynamic topography, weather, and everything else. And that is what makes it well-balanced, candidly. And we can, just divide ourselves on little independent circumstances that are pressing and important at the time. But ultimately, we all inhabit the same earth.
Right.
And we all breathe the same oxygen,
Right.
and
Death
largely,
rate is 100%. No
and
matter
the death
where you
rate's
go.
100%. We're sharing it all together.
Yeah.
And so at the same time that goes to the universal component of what I was talking about before and transcendent, that, hey, we are universally, let's be the same authentic self universally. And so, as I encourage them to study the culture, I go there and I say, what's the same about the culture you're, and what's different, and what are the benefits of those two things, and that gives us a perspective in any conversation. It doesn't matter whether we're sitting at a table with someone that is of different gender, age, ethnicity. Doesn't matter. Um, we then have that worldview that we can change our perspective as a result.
So those are some of the ways that you use to help people find their life on purpose, right? When I remember working out in the garage, and my oldest, who's now 27, he was about 6 at the time, and I gave him a magnifying glass on the driveway. Now, what do you do with the magnifying glass when you're 6 or 7 years old? Or you burn stuff. That's what boys do. So I even taught him. I said, "Now look, let me show you how to do this. Now this can hurt. It can burn your skin. But look at this 2x4. You can burn a cool thing in there. See that?" So he was out there playing while I'm doing my thing, and I kept glancing over there, and I saw him put it over his arm, and all of a sudden he goes, "Ow!" So how can we figure out how to help those we love find and live their purpose? Now you talked about you taking your kids on trips and something, and those types of things. Not everybody can do that, right? So what are some ways that other people can use to find their help their kids and their family live their life with purpose?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we're so fixated on external things to find our purpose instead of internal things. And quite frankly, that my purpose statement is through intuitive interaction, propel leaders beyond their self-imposed barriers to live out their unique purpose. And that might be very focused and clarifying, but that's not something that I knew or defined until maybe my early 30s. But it was always the way I lived. And so I think sometimes we want to sit and think about what is my purpose and think about, but we're going to find our purpose much more by doing than by thinking. And so, what do we naturally gravitate towards? And so, as I watch my children, or really anyone, right, as I went back to how I kind of learn about people, I'm like, what are they consistently bringing up? Because that is coming from inside them, not externally, right?
What
That's
were the
coming,
kids bringing up when they were
yeah.
talking to you? Or
In my case, in the kids, it's, what have I seen them do even since they were young? And what do they talk about most? That's usually in alignment with your purpose, right? Because your purpose and your passion are usually correlated, right? God is not going to place a purpose in our life that we're not passionate about. That's hard to believe at times because whatever else, and it may be that we develop a passion for it, and it may be in alignment with our purpose, right? And so, I can, and as for example, as I just gave you my purpose statement, I go back to that mission trip that I went on when I was 15 years old. When I take my 15-year-olds, there naturally what we're doing is we're in Ecuador and we're building houses for families, right? But what I find myself gravitating towards is that leader that's putting it together,
oh,
because I
talking about the
recognize
local leader.
the local
Okay.
leader that is bringing the church together and helping pull these resources together.
Hmm.
And why? Because I realize that family's going to get a house, but the leader's going to find 10 more people that are going to get houses.
Yeah.
And so I'm gravitating to those who multiply, right? And so that's something that's something I've always done. I've always tried to study the leaders to say, how can I help them or learn from them? As opposed to some people are fixated on the individuals that are there, and we need those people.
Right.
And so that's where my passion was birthed out of that. When I looked back at my life and I said, where am I consistently gravitating towards? I saw that it was leadership, and that's where that was part of my purpose statement, just as you saw. So sometimes we just investigate our life by doing, and then that's where we then see where our purpose and our passion lives.
Yeah. Very good. Now, you talked a little bit about structuring time to invest with your children to give them space to discover their purpose. Um, what happens when well, it's easy to get stuck,
Yeah.
right? We all have plans, we have goals, we have desires, and oftentimes, at least in my experience, sometimes you get in a rut, or things go off the rails, or you don't get that plan you had does not come to fruition. And I think a critical life skill is that growth mindset, that even though it looks like a failure, and it might be, it's still growth. You have to be able to learn something from that. And you talked a little bit about that. It took me 7 years to graduate college. And you know why? Because I hated college. It was horrible for me. It was rough. It was a struggle. But I managed. I knew I had to finish. So I pushed through and was able to finish. How did you help your kids to navigate life's ruts and speed bumps to continue discovering their purpose?
Yeah, so I remember when I was 16 years old and back to the ruts, and like many 16-year-olds probably ignored the signs that are on the street, one of which was the speed limit.
Mm.
And so I went on a gravel road for the first time, and I was running a little bit late, and I kind of anytime I drive anywhere, I'm estimating the number of miles I got to cover and the appropriate speed limit plus a couple more maybe. And so then I'm on this gravel road without a speed limit. I thought, perfect. And so then I'm driving quick on a gravel road, and there's ruts on a gravel road, as you were
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. And then ultimately, what happened was there was a truck coming. And so then I knew that I was going too fast in the middle of the road. And so I went over to the side, and that's where the gravel was a little bit slower.
Yeah.
And so then I remember grabbing the right hand side of the car, pulled back because there's there. So I overcorrected and I started spinning. And then I saw this truck coming head on, and then the car stopped. And I remember parked on the side of the road. I said, God, this is your sign to tell me to pay attention to signs. I think so many times in our life there's warning signs because easily I could have rolled over
Yeah.
and crashed. I was going way faster than needed. That pickup truck that was coming for
We hear
head
about
on
that kind of thing all the day, all the
happens
time,
all the
ending
time.
in tragedy.
Exactly. And I remember as clear as day God speaking to me and saying, "Hey, pay attention to my signs. They're there for a reason." And so that's one of the things I teach our kids is say, "Hey, what is the indicator?" Sometimes it's just a still small voice. Sometimes it's a blaring road sign. And so from that moment on, I said, "God, give me a sign." And I'm obviously pretty dense and I'm a slow learner. So if you need to beat me on the forehead
Yeah.
with it, you certainly can. And you pay attention to those signs. And so sometimes then we recognize those signs and then we can make a new choice.
Right.
And I think that's when we're stuck. Sometimes that means, hey, let's make a new choice. Let's not stick in the same choices we've been making because we're stuck. And that's that growth mindset. Growth mindset is not saying grow the same direction. It's saying, what new choice do I need to make that will get me out of the step I am in now? Right. I mean, and so,
And
maybe
maybe
that,
prevent it in the future.
sure, maybe your 6.5 year of college, you realized, you know what, I'm kind of stuck here.
I sure did.
So I need to make a new choice. And maybe you married somebody that ultimately earned a doctorate in
Yes.
education. And
Motivated me.
so they'll make a new choice. And that's where we get growth mindset.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, we always have to prioritize our time with our family. We talked a little bit about that. We have to have meaningful conversations and make these core memories, important memories that they learn from. We also want to create an environment where they can discover their own life purpose. You said 4 kids, same parents,
Right.
all different, right? The return on that investment is precious and it's priceless. So talk a little bit about some of the things you remember teaching the kids when they were young that you see now that they're young adults and growing into their own life that you see a return on that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is those frameworks, right? I think every time that a child has had a opportunity for a decision, we don't want to look at the outcome. We want to look at the preparation necessary. And so I'll give an example. So I remember my son. He had an argument with my wife, as many sons. I mean, my mom will tell you the exact same thing happened. And I remember afterwards, I said, "You know why I'm up here?" And he's like, "Well, mom's mad at me." I said, "You got
Oh.
that right. So that's why I'm up here." And so, he was thinking I was going to talk about why she's mad at him. And
Uh-huh.
ultimately, as a parent, I was going to intervene. And I said, "Was that the outcome you were looking for?" He's like, "What?" I said, "The way I see it is you're grounded for a week, you lost your phone, and obviously your mom's mad at you. And now I have to be up here. That's what happened." I said, "Is that the outcome when you were sitting there discussing whatever you were
And
discussing
he
with
didn't think of
mom?"
it like that. Like,
No.
well, absolutely no, of course not. Who would say yes to that, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I said, "Is that the outcome?" I said, "Now what led to that outcome?" I said, "The conversation started here and then it escalated here, here, and here. You had choices at all that stages that would lead to this outcome. So I'm not here to give you the outcome. I'm here to discuss how do we get to the outcome." And to me, those are principles that say, wait a minute, if there's an outcome that's on the other side, I didn't make sure the outcome I'm working to is the one I want.
Right.
And where in those decisions should I back away?
Yeah.
Some of the best business decisions I've made have been the outcome when I got closer to the end of the dock. I use this analogy. Many people see me sprinting towards the end of the dock to ultimately jump into the lake, as an example.
Yeah.
And at the very end of the dock, they're like, "You didn't jump." The best decisions were that stop sign again, saying, "Hey, wait a minute. This is a cross section. I don't see any traffic, but there's a reason to stop. Maybe it's a blind drive or those things," and listening to those signs and making that stop. So again, I teach my kids principles to say, "Hey, what outcome is the outcome you're working towards, what you wanted it to be?" And if not, stop now. And then you won't be grounded for a week and you won't lose your phone and those types of things. And those are principles you can apply forever in life because, again, after that period of time, there was never an argument to the same degree with my wife. Now they, of course, disagree and those types of things. But he recognized, wait a minute, I see where this is going. I've seen the outcome of that, and I didn't like it.
Yeah. And then to your point, later on in life, you can look around and say, okay, is this where I wanted to be
Right.
6 months ago, a year ago, 5 minutes
That's
ago?
right.
And if not, let's back that up and see maybe where I went wrong and where I can change for future.
One of the greatest successes that we can have is seeing the joy of that. And I remember, my children, all of them were involved in sports, right? That's important for them. And I remember even as an early, the children were young and I was coaching them as a father. And then at about 5th, 6th grade, I stopped coaching them because my skills were just not good enough.
Right.
The team was better than
Yeah.
I was able to coach that particular sport. And so they went to those sports. But I remember all of them, the older children, at least in high school. And, whether they were in, my oldest ran track, my second oldest was involved in soccer, and then my third oldest was in basketball. The greatest joy wasn't a made shot, wasn't a track success or even a great defensive play. It was watching them give their absolute best for their team and, looking at the circumstances and making the best decision. Whereas some people like, you scored the winning goal. That wasn't the crowning moment for me. Is saying, here, you are putting your best self in that moment, win or lose, because we're not always going to be a starter. And so the joy was seeing the principle of them saying, do your best no matter what. It doesn't always equate to a win, but if you're doing
Right.
your absolute best in that moment for others, your team and others, then that's success. And so those are the times you see that manifested, and sports drive that directionally as well. So
Good. Is that a little bit? That's a little affirming for you as a father. You see a little glimpse of that.
absolutely, because I know that they will always be environments they can do their best.
Uh-huh.
Right now, that doesn't mean always a win, right? We can make the best decision and an outcome may not be the outcome, but the framework for doing our best is always there, right? Focused, put our full effort into it, do it for others' sake. And even if we lose, we've still done our absolute best and we can go home with that.
Well, that about wraps up our time, Reed. Thank you very much again for your time, for sharing some great memories from your life and your experience. Remember, folks, to recap, focusing on your family is what we talked about today. Want to thank all of our listeners here at ReedFlections. ReedFlections is a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. Next time, we're going to talk about the priority of productivity. My name is Art Calderon. Get out there and be purposeful.
And thank you for giving me the last word again, Art. I gladly you do that. And so maybe your family is evolving, right? Maybe you don't have a family or you commit to friends or otherwise. And you say, hey, this isn't relevant. I don't have kids yet. I may never have kids or my kids are much long grown. I remember this as an early adult. I would say someone else needs a family, and that can be you, right? Maybe you have adopted these things and you're later in life. You can be a friend that becomes family to somebody else no matter what they're going through. And so whether it's you and your family that you can make these principles apply to, or someone else that needs a support of a family, be that family to somebody else, and you can truly live a life on purpose. And we will see you next time.